Mayday, mayday, there's an emergency, a housing emergency, sky-high housing prices, countless scammers, and students living in tents. A new study shows that Amsterdam is now the most expensive city in Europe. There are no more homes in Amsterdam. Most Dutch people will tell you that Amsterdam is not a good representation of the country, and that there are plenty of beautiful towns and cities besides Amsterdam. But of course, Amsterdam is still the most well-known and popular city in the Netherlands. So I love Amsterdam, but I want to be realistic with you and talk to you about a different side of Amsterdam that you might not know and what else is behind those perfect Instagram pictures. Because most people must go through a painful journey in order to claim the right to live in the city. So let me tell you about this other side and why you may not want to live in Amsterdam by telling you about two things. One, the housing crisis, and two, why Amsterdam is now the most expensive city in Europe. Well, first, let me introduce to you Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a well-known theory in psychology about human needs, motivation, and happiness. Basic human needs must first be met at the bottom, food, shelter, water, before going up the pyramid. And while you may know about the international job market, the fun, diversity, and beauty of the city, freedom, tolerance, and the almighty bitterballen, none of that matters if you don't have a place to stay. Because there is a housing crisis in Amsterdam. And you might not have a place to stay even if you can afford it. You might be living in hotels or Airbnbs for a while. You might get scammed. You might even end up in a tent. I've never seen a housing market like this. In fact, according to UBS's Real Estate Bubble Index, Amsterdam is most likely in a bubble, and it's one of the worst in the world. And that's because half of all house seekers in the country want to live in Amsterdam. And what happens when there are too many people and not enough homes? It's an all-out war between the Dutch, internationals, students, and if you're a student, I empathize with you, because once upon a time, I was a student too, looking for housing. And for me, trying to find housing was the biggest shock and source of stress when trying to live in Amsterdam. I mean, when I finally found a job, I was happy, ecstatic. I was finally going to live in Amsterdam. But little did I know that trying to find a place to stay was even more difficult than finding a job. But hey, I got lucky. Well, that's what everyone says when they find a place to stay in Amsterdam. Oh, I got lucky. I got lucky. And I've been lucky, or you could say unlucky, 3 times because I've had to move 3 times. But I spent countless stressful hours trying to find a place to stay, applying, researching, going to viewings. The first place I lived in was a dream. I lived on a single canal in a Dutch canal house, and I only found this place after sending 50 plus Facebook messages, countless scammers, but I had to leave after 2 years because many landlords in this country, they don't want to extend contracts past 2 years because tenants get rights and then it's hard to kick people out. And so then I sent 50 more Facebook messages, 20 more scammers, countless more stressful hours, but eventually I did find a place on the east side. But then I had to leave soon after because let's just say me and the flatmate did not get along. And so then I had to go through the stressful journey again of looking for my current place where I was 1 out of 100 in the application process, and I had to go through 2 rounds of interviews with the landlord. But here's the thing, if you want to live in Amsterdam, you can't be picky. You have to take what you can get, and usually that's the first thing that you get a yes to. And everyone I know who lives in Amsterdam has had challenges with housing. And what happens if you have problems? For example, my first student housing was flooded. I've heard of numerous stories of people getting scammed, bad landlords, bad roommates, and what if you have fleas?
So when we moved in, we found out the house was flea infested, and the infestation continued for 4 months.
And the landlord's supposed to take care of it.
Yeah, that's what we thought. The landlord was open in terms of paying, but she was never present in the apartment. The problem was never about money. The problem was us spending time trying to solve the problem. That in the end played a very important role in my mental health, actually, that this whole incident destroyed me for months. It was probably the darkest period of my life so far.
So I've heard numerous stories like this, but the challenge is that many people don't have other options. So if you don't want to deal with fleas or want a more secure way to find housing, check out Housing Anywhere. They're Europe's largest rental platform. You can browse through thousands of listings with pictures and videos, create alerts, chat with landlords, and find a new home online without having to go to a viewing. Because let me tell you about the apartment hunting process in Amsterdam. On the free market, you apply and you compete against hundreds of people per listing. And if you're lucky and fast, you might get selected to a viewing. And you need to be able to attend that one viewing in the middle of the week in a random time slot. And depending on the listing, you may also get interviewed. Then you submit your bid and then you wish for the best. And of course, you may also have to deal with scammers. I know people who have lost thousands of euros due to scammers. Now with Housing Anywhere, you don't have to deal with scammers. Your first month's rent isn't transferred to the owner until you've actually seen the place, and it's okay. Because if you've seen the place and there are fleas or it's not exactly as described, you can request a full refund in the first 48 hours. So if you're looking for a place to stay in Amsterdam or the Netherlands, I'll leave a 10% off discount code with Housing Anywhere in the description below. But why aren't there enough houses? Well, there are always politics involved and I don't want to get into politics. Okay, so I do actually want to talk about this. Not the politics of it, but what is actually happening. Because the nitrogen crisis is causing delays to the building of new homes. Nitrogen is a chemical that is released in the construction building process. And too much nitrogen isn't good for the environment, so the Dutch government decided it was time to reduce the emissions of nitrogen. And as a result of that, every new activity that involved the release of nitrogen needed a permit. And so then thousands of housing projects were then put on hold. And that also explains why many new homes are not being built fast enough according to forecast. Well, okay, what else? Around 50% of housing in Amsterdam is dedicated to social housing, which is great. And the government, they're planning to increase that number, the number of rent-controlled homes. But what's actually happening is that investors and landlords, they're selling their properties because they no longer find it profitable. And what happens then is that there are less houses in the free market, and that also increases prices as well. Airbnb has also played a role as well, because many homeowners found out that they could make a lot more money renting out their homes to tourists on Airbnb than to locals, which has reduced the housing supply and also increased prices. In fact, there's an estimated 7,000 Airbnb listings in Amsterdam, 75% of which are entire homes or apartments, which means there could be an extra 7,000 extra apartments for rent if homeowners decided to rent them to locals instead. And hey, Amsterdam and the Netherlands in general, it's a small country. There just isn't a whole lot of space, with a growing population that far outpaces the growth in supply. And so we take a look at the most basic principle of economics, the law of supply and demand, which basically states that when there is more demand for housing than there is supply of houses, prices go up, which can then explain the housing crisis. Now, on the demand side, the population of the Netherlands increased by 227,000 in 2022 to almost 18 million people. This was mainly due to external immigration from Ukraine and other countries. At the same time, more international students are also studying in the Netherlands due to its high-quality education, low tuition, widespread availability of English, and the attractiveness of cities like Amsterdam. And that number will likely increase in the upcoming years as well. So more and more people are coming to the Netherlands, which increases demand for housing. And then on the supply side, while houses are not being built fast enough due to strict regulations, there are less rental units in Amsterdam because investors are selling their rental units, and because of the increase in Airbnb listings over the past 10 years, that has decreased the supply of long-term rental units. And so I've learned if you want to live in Amsterdam, there's a secret equation. It depends on how much money you have, if you have a permanent contract, how quick you are, how prepared you are in terms of all your documents, who you know, and a lot of luck. And even if you've managed to find a place to stay, you're probably going to have to pay a lot of money to live in Amsterdam, because Amsterdam has been recently ranked the most expensive city in Europe. With rental prices increasing and housing being your biggest expense, let's take a look at a real-life example of how much it costs to live in Amsterdam. The average gross income in Amsterdam is around 50,000 euros according to pay scale. And if we take out taxes, that gets us a monthly net income of 3,000 euros. And if we use my monthly expenses, cross-check them with Numbeo, I spend around 1,800 euros a month on housing. This includes 1,500 on base rent and 300 in utilities. And this is quite similar to the averages reported on Numbeo.com. I'll also spend around 70 euros a week on groceries at Albert Heijn. I will eat out 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a month. Dinner and drinks alone can easily be 50 euros. I will also go out depending on the month. This could be museums, concerts, shows, etc. 100 euros a month on that. Mandatory healthcare is around 150 euros. And I'll spend 50 euros on local transportation because I travel to The Hague or Utrecht a few times a month. And travel, 300 euros a month because I will travel internationally 2-3 times a year. And I'll go back to the US at least once a year. A plane ticket alone can be 1,000 euros, so this is quite conservative. And everything else, I'll spend around 125 euros. This could be the gym, shopping, haircuts, etc. And this rounds up to around 3,000 euros a month in total expenses. Now, on an income of 50,000 euros a year, one can live quite comfortably, but when it comes to saving, one might not be able to save a lot because you're spending more than 50% of your income on housing. And of course, everyone's budgets, it's gonna look different based on your situation, how much you make. But the truth is, how much you spend on housing, that's harder to change, and that's gonna be your biggest expense. I know a lot of people who decide to live in Amsterdam paycheck to paycheck for the experience. And don't forget how overcrowded and loud Amsterdam can be. So, have I scared you enough? Do you still want to live in Amsterdam? Well, if you still do, there are other options. And sorry for quickly interrupting, I just want to quickly introduce myself if I haven't already. I'm David, originally from California, and I make videos about life in the Netherlands. If you found this video helpful, I would appreciate it if you could like, comment, or subscribe. It would help me out a lot. Thanks so much, and let's get back to the video. And I still highly recommend living in Amsterdam if you're willing to go through the process and if you eventually find a place to stay. Because of its charm, the international atmosphere, all the things that there are to do, the job market, the safety, and everything else. A few other recommendations are you don't need to live inside the canal ring. You can live outside in places like Eiburg, Oostorp, Diemen, Norb, Amstelveen, and while these are more quiet areas, you can still get into the city center within 10, 15, 20 minutes by bus or tram and pay a lot less as well. Or you could live in a nearby town like Hoofddorp or Zaandam. Yes, it's more quiet and cheaper, but you can get into Amsterdam within 20 minutes. Or live in another city. I mean, the Netherlands is not Amsterdam. There are so many other beautiful places and towns and cities to live in, such as The Hague, Utrecht, Haarlem. And if you want to get into Amsterdam, you can take the train. The country is not so big. But again, there's something about living in Amsterdam, the charm, the energy, something different and unique that money cannot buy. I love Amsterdam and I would encourage you to live here if you can, but I just want to offer a realistic perspective of what it takes to live in Amsterdam. Because until you find a place to stay, you won't be able to enjoy the benefits of living in Amsterdam. And that's the truth. And if you still want to live in Amsterdam, know that you must go through hell in order to get to heaven.